So we'll get started our session now, the international session. We will have the moderator and presenters participating together. So let me introduce the presenters and moderator. Because of some technical difficulties, we are a little bit delayed. So we will change a little bit of the order of the presentation today. So we will get started with Mr. Nam Gi-young from Global Tour Japan first, rather than Dr. Peter Tallo. So let's get started with Mr. Nam Gi-young from Japan. And then before that, Ikun Oh will deliver some remarks. Please welcome him. So we will get started with the first session in the morning. So let us change the order of the presentation a little bit because of the technical difficulties. And we will have Mr. Nam Gi-young from Global Tour Japan first as the first presenter today. So he's gonna spend 15 minutes for his presentation. And if you need more time, feel free to spend more time. And we are trying to know the whereabouts of Dr. Peter Tallo, and if he does not access to the conference, then we'll move on to the next session, next presenter.
Excellency, Nazalin Lim, is she there? No, he's not on here. And Nigel Wong. Please raise your hand. I see your face. Okay. Nigel, do you hear me?
We have Mr. Chung from Busan Tourism Corporation, and then we have Nora Sophia here. And we have Mr. Baek Seung-pil. So the presenters and the panelists, you are given 7 minutes for your presentation. And the rest 50 minutes, we will spend the time for discussions between the panelists and presenters. So I will speak in Korean and English as required. So first we will have Mr. Nam Gi-young as the first presenter today. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. Thank you. Today's presentation I will talk about first about the tourism in Japan from the practitioner's point of view. Second, I will move on to the countermeasures against COVID-19, what we have done, and then what we will plan to do for that matter. And then I will touch upon the cooperation that we need to have before the COVID-19 ends. So for the sake of this presentation, let me focus on the inbound tourism. And in 2003, we started with 5 million tourists. And then in 2013, we hit the landmark of 10 million tourists, and in 2016 we hit 20 million tourists. And then last year, Japan held Rugby World Cup in Japan, and then Japan had 32 million tourists in 2019, and then people in Japan expected to have tourists more than 40 million in 2020 if we had the Olympic Games held. And the 2020 Olympics was delayed because of the COVID-19, and the number of the inbound tourists dropped by 99.9%, and it is the cancellation of the tourist. It was 100% cancellation, so it's almost the shutdown of the industry. And Japan, they put down the Olympic Games mark, but in December, Japan put up the mark again to send their message to overcome the COVID-19. So as a person who witnessed the change of the tourism industry in Japan because of the COVID-19, I will move on to the impact of the COVID-19. And in January, I had the event participated by more than 300 Chinese tourists, and then that was the first and the last event that I have this year. So because of the COVID-19, we had the remote working conditions in February, and in March, all the tourism reservation was cancelled. And at the same time, because of the government guidelines, I had to have the loans to keep my business afloat. But by April, all the reservations were cancelled, and then my employees, they had to work from home. And by July, we started Go to Travel campaign in Japan, except for Tokyo. That was the event and policy of the Japanese government to revive the industry. But in October, we included Tokyo as Go to Travel campaign city. And the domestic tourism was being revived, and our company also was part of it. But in November, those infected by the virus, the number has increased. So now in Hokkaido, except for Hokkaido and Osaka, the Go to Travel campaign is ongoing, but in December, we have the biggest number of those infected by COVID-19. And then we are worried that maybe Tokyo will be accepted for the Go to Travel campaign, but it's not decided yet. And we have the branch offices of the global companies, and then in the tourism companies, and the employees had to see the reduction of their payroll, and the travel agencies, they had to shut down their offices. And the international tourism division is shut down, or those people who are planning the international tourism, they stopped their work. And also the city tour buses, their operation stopped, and they are parked in their garage. And the wholesalers in Japan, they are reducing the number of their branches across the country. Secondly, let me tell you about the response strategy that we adopted. In November, we held the private sector workshop in Japan, and this year we held the event connected by online communications, and we are connected to the broadcasting companies, and then it was so successful. So this is the private sector participation in the event. And secondly, we started to develop and adopt e-commerce into the tourism industry. And not only us, but other travel companies, they started to launch virtual tour products to sell the goods from different regions of the country. And thirdly, we adopted digital transformation system so that hotels and motels, they have the communications with the virtual tourists, and they also provide the streaming experience of their hotel. So through this digital transformation, the recognition or awareness of those regions was enhanced. And the mark now you see is the hot spring specific brand, and we prepare this hot spring specific product brand, and we planned the safe travel across the country, including more than 3,000 hot springs, including 24,000 accommodations. So through this product, we will contribute to development of new contents in the age of COVID-19. And let me move on to the regional and international cooperation. Most of all, I think that all the travel associations and the leaders in the industry, we need to have the countermeasures against COVID-19 so that we can provide the safety and security to the general travelers. And I think that's the priority that we will have, or we need to have. So we first need to revamp the environment for the promotion of the regional tourism, and then we need to simplify the PCR testing for the travelers, and we also need to earn the understanding of the local people for the industry and enhance the safety around the environment. And we also need to vitalize the local tourism campaign. For example, Go to Travel campaign needs to be enhanced further in cooperation with the government. And now, starting May, we adopted the micro-tourism. This is our efforts to have the vitalized regional travel. And next, let me move on to the keyword for post-COVID-19. So we will focus. So we used to focus on cheap clothes and short, but the keywords should be changed to relax, near, and independent. That is my insight into the industry. Before I wrap up, so now we are struggling with COVID-19. Nevertheless, people in the industry, we are working to find out the answer against the COVID-19, and I hope that everyone should keep in shape so that we can overcome this COVID-19 and turn out to be successful in this effort. Thank you for your presentation. In Japan, there are many movements to fight against COVID-19, and then we heard from President Nam about
이
Japan's
시작된 지
examples.
거의 한 15년,
So
20년
you
안
mentioned
됐습니까?
go to
2003년부터
Japan
시작이 됐습니다.
그러니까 17년
campaign.
정도 된
It
거네요.
started.
지금 계속 그
When
캠페인으로
did it start? It started in
저편 그 하고 있는 거죠.
2013
예, 2003년부터
and now it
지금까지
is
계속되고
ongoing.
그
It is
뭐
still
토론은
ongoing.
이따가
After it
하고
was
나서
started in
거기에 대한
2013.
코멘트를 뭐 하겠습니다. 이거 하는 게 아니고.
I have my
그래서
comments
일본
on this
같은 경우에
presentation.
맨 나중에
but
이제 강조를 하셨는데
Before that,
그게 이
as you
근거리,
emphasized at the last part of your
그다음에
presentation,
인디펜던트,
short,
그래서 앞으로
near,
저
independent,
이 포스트
and
코비드-19
safe, they are the keywords in the post-COVID-19 era.
independent, 뭐
That
이런
should be
식으로
near,
한다고 아주 정리를 해주셨어요.
relaxed,
뭐
and
이런 거는
independent.
기존에 그 코비드-19
So,
후에 트래블 트렌드가 어떻게 변할 것인가?
in
라고 했을 때
post-COVID-19,
현재
that should
일어나는
be the
그
trend
near
after
driving rather than
we
flying.
overcome
그리고 이
COVID-19. So the keywords
domestic
should
tourism
also
rather than
include
international
near
그래서 그런 트렌드를 좀
domestic
잘
tourism
반영을 하고 있는 것
rather than
같습니다.
international tourism
자, 두
rather than flight.
번째는 피터
And
탈로,
then let
그
us move on to the
University
next
of Texas.
presenter.
텍사스 A&M 교수죠. 그 교수고
So
지금은
we have Mr.
tourism
Professor
and more 그 대표로 일하고
Peter
있는데
Tallo,
통화했는데
who is
온라인
working
연결됐어요?
as the CEO of
아직
Tourism
접속이 안
and
됐다고
more.
그래서
Is he
여러분들
online now?
이분이
So we touched
보여준 게
upon.
있습니다. 여기 좀
He is not accessed yet.
이게 글로벌 컨퍼런스
So
on tourism and
until
COVID.
we have
제가
him
이
with us,
포인트만
we need
여기
to
9개의 슬라이드가 있는데
have this
그중에서
PowerPoint
7개에
presentation.
대해서만 제가
So
이분의 설명을
his
그 하면서
presentation
조금
was
코멘트를
about
주기로
global
하겠습니다.
conference
왜냐면 이게 15minutes인데
and
그냥
global
뭐 읽어가는
conference
거는
on
의미가
tourism
없을
and
것 같고,
COVID.
그래서 제가
So
대신 하게 됨을 여러분
for
용서해 주시기
him,
바랍니다. 자, 피터
I
탈로,
will
Tourism
go
and More,
over
자,
the
Incorporation.
presentation
이 사람이
for him
강조하는 것은 이제
with
그
my comments.
세계의 전쟁이다.
So please understand that he's not here to deliver his presentation,
그러니까
and then
의료
let
전쟁이
me
벌어지겠죠. 그
deliver the
백신을
presentation
만든다,
for
아니면
him.
therapeutic
So he is
medication을 만든다.
focusing
이런
on,
식으로 그 하고 또
he's
이
talking
테스팅도 해야
about
되니까
three words that
그것이
we are
medical
facing
war다
now.
그러고.
First, it is about medical
그래서
war.
현재
So
우리가
because
이
we are
솔루션을 하는
trying to
것이
find the vaccination and
물론
medicine,
관광,
and then the tests are conducted. So
락다운하고
he
그다음에 그
coined the word, coined the
이동을
word,
제한하고 하는
and
것은 좋은데 그렇게 되면 관광이 다 죽잖아요.
tourism
그러니까 에코노믹
and
워,
lockdown
경제 전쟁이다. 왜? 투리즘 인더스트리가
and
다
restriction on
죽어버리고
the mobility.
특히 관광 쪽에 죽죠.
Those things are happening, but the consequences
관광에
are
의존하고 있는 뭐
the
카리비안
debt.
컨트리라든가
tourism industry.
태국, 동남아시아 나라들 그다음에
Not only
스페인,
in the
이태리 같은
tourism
경우에는
industry, but also across
이게
the
관광이 안 되면
economy,
국민들이 먹고 살 게 없으니까
we
지금은
suffer.
굉장히 폭동까지
So
일어나요. 일부 지역에서는
tourism dependent
관광은
countries,
먹고 살 게
they
없다.
are
그래서
hit
문을
hard
오픈해라.
by
그러니까
COVID-19,
economic
like
war가
Spain and Italy.
세 번째는 어떤
So
이
they
perception,
sometimes
인식과
have
두려움에
riots
대한
in their
전쟁이다.
country.
이런
So
거를
they
이
want to
두려움의
open their borders, but it is
두려움에
not
대한
easy to
인식을
open the
극복을
borders
해야만
because of the
우리가
COVID-19.
관광이 다
And
될 수 있다.
also,
근데 이 두려움이라는
Dr.
것은
Peter
acted
Tallo
on by media.
talked about
이게 언론에서
the
오늘도 우리
fear
1,000몇
and
명
perception
넘어갔다.
war. So
그러니까
only
모든
after
사람들이
we
굉장히 두려움을 갖잖아요.
overcome the fear and
그래서 이런
perception,
것이
we
제3차 유행이고
it
미국은
is not
하루에
easy,
수만 명이
but
죽고
the
이런 것이
fear
보도가 되니까
is egged
이
by
언론
the
보도에
media.
의해서
So
이
as we heard from our
두려움과
news report,
어떤
the new
관광을 보는 perception,
infected people,
인식이
the
상당히
number hit
어렵게
more
됐다.
than 1,000.
그래서 우리가
So
이거
the news
자꾸
media
보도를
and the
해서
media reports
fear,
also
이
trigger
두려움을
the fear
자꾸 이렇게
about
사람들한테 불러일으켜야
the
될 것이냐,
pandemic.
뭐 이런 거를 하니까
So
이 사람의 솔루션은 mitigate fear, 좀
rather
두려움을
than
감소시키는,
aggravate
진정시키는 그런 것이 있고,
fear
그다음에
among
이
people,
어떤 것이 키 fear인가 어떤 것이
Dr.
두려움을 주는
Tallow
것인가. 그래서 그걸 찾아내서 좀 컨트롤할 필요가
tells
있다.
us that the fear
자, 그다음에 두
mitigation is
번째는 new
important.
challenges global tourism is
And
facing. 그래서
he also
이
defined
어떤
key
그
fears
새로운
and
도전이
how
글로벌
to
관광이
confront them.
맞고 있느냐
And
봤을 때 이 관광은 내셔널 투리즘의 굉장히 중요한 부분인데
he moves on to new
지금은 어떻게
challenges that
되냐면은
global tourism is
실업을
facing.
많이 양산하죠. 저 고용보다는. 그래서 그런 저 이슈가
The
있다.
tourism
그다음에
is very
이
important for the
관광
economy, but tourism
산업에서는 그
also
moral responsibility
contributing to
이
generating jobs.
도덕적인
But now
책임을
tourism seems
다시
to be an
우리가
important part
평가를
of the
해야
national
된다.
economies.
그런 것은 어떤
Does not
얘기냐면은
generate
그 외국
employment anymore.
관광객들을 자기 나라로
And
입국시킬 것인가
tourism
안 할 것인가
has
그런
its
어떤
moral
그
responsibility,
질문이
but
돼야
it has
된다.
to be reassessed now. I mean,
그다음에 그 다음에는 이제 아픈
the
사람은
global
어떤 나라에서
tourist,
어떻게 치료해야 되느냐, 비용은 어떻게 돼야
when it
되느냐.
comes to
좀
global
이게
tourists, we have to
이
decide
약간
whether
관광하고
to
멀리 있는 어떤
accept them or
그
let them come
의료적인
to the
부분에서
country.
그 접근하고 있습니다.
And we
탈러
have the people
교수가
infected,
여기
and
중요하게
we
하는
need to
컨셉이
know
우리는
whether we
여러분들 이
have to,
제목을
who
보면
has
세이프티
to
투리즘
shoulder
또는
the burden
세큐리티
of the
투리즘이라는 말을
treatment.
많이 쓰는데
And
사실 세큐리티는 무슨 보안이라는
Tal-
의미가 있고
Dr.
그거보다는 오히려
Tallow,
이거는 이제
his important concept is
세이프티라는
that,
것이
so
더 중요한데
his
이
concept
사람은
is safety
surety라는
tourism.
단어를 써요.
And
SURETY와 surety라는
safety
것은
tourism
뭐
and
우리가 뭐
surety tourism.
확실하다 뭐 이런
But safety is the
보장한다
key
이런
word.
의미로 쓰잖아요. 근데
And
이
Dr. Tallow
학계에서는
uses
이게
the word surety
이
tourism.
surety tourism 이런
Surety,
말은
by
굉장히 저도
definition,
unfamiliar하다.
means
잘 쓰지 않는 사용이지만
confident
이
or
사람들 이
definite
사람의
or
surety 말들을
guarantee.
한번 보면
But in the
이게
industry,
관광은 surety가 여기
I'm
가운데가
not
있고
familiar with surety tourism,
이거
but
네 번째
Dr.
컷을 좀
Tallow introduces the
네 번째
model
마들 나온 거.
focusing on surety.
네. 그거 보시게 되면은 그
So
security가
if you look
있고요.
at page
safety,
4 about
ecology,
models,
환경, economics, reputation. 맞으면
we have
tourism,
security, safety,
이 관광을 보장할 수 있는 것은
ecology,
안전이 있어야 되고
economics,
환경이 좋아야 되고
reputation.
경제적으로도
So
살아있는
tourism surety is composed
그리고
of those
그
five
명성을
factors.
잃지 않아야
So
된다.
first we need to have
이런 것이
safety,
종합이 돼서
have good
tourism
environment and
surety라는
ecology,
개념을 이 사람이 만든 거예요.
and
그
the economy should be
파워포인트에서는
be
보여주진
revived,
않지만
and the
여기
reputation is also
레퓨테이션에
important.
대해서 설명을 해서 제가 여기 조금 더 여기에 대해서 부가 설명을 하자 그러면 이게
The point
명성이잖아요.
of this
레퓨테이션.
PowerPoint
그러니까 어떤 이
is that
데스티네이션이 어떤 쪽으로 명성을 가졌다.
it's
말하자면
not mentioned here, but if I may add
complete
about reputation,
카비드 테스팅 그리고
reputation
이런
is about
방역을
destination.
철저히 한다라는
What
이
reputation does
미디어를 통해서 알려지면
one destination has,
사람들이 안심하고 그것을 여행하게
so
된다.
that reputation
그러나
is
만일에
about
어느
parental
곳에서
rules,
이런 발병률이 높았다.
safety, and
지금
the end
오늘
of
제가 부산에
COVID-19.
오니까 여기도 뭐
So in that case, tourists will
어디서 냈다고 신고하고
come to
계속
the
뜨니까
destination.
불안해지잖아요.
But if
근데 이런
one
것이
destination
언론에
is
보도되면
infamous
네거티브 퍼블리시티
for
그러니까
its a high
부정적인
number
언론
of
노출로
infectious
인해서
people,
사람들한테
that
bad
destination will lose
reputation을 주게
their
된다.
good reputation.
그러면
So in
관광객이 안
that
온다.
case, negative publicity will
아주
happen
중요한 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
because
저는
of negative
특별하게
news
퍼블리시티에
report.
관심이 많은 사람이라서
So it will lead
이분도 거기에
to
대해서
bad
굉장히
reputation
길게
of
거의
one
한
particular
5분간 2
destination,
페이지를 좀
and the
쓰고
tourist
있어요.
will not come to the
자, 이런 것이
destination.
어우러져야
So as a
tourism
person who is
surety를
very
guarantee를
interested
할
in
수 있다. 그
publicity,
얘기입니다.
I I
그다음에
am
뭐 리스크는 그냥
very
넘어가겠습니다.
interested in the concept of
basic
reputation,
principles of
as
tourism
Dr.
security.
Talo tells us.
관광을
So only after we
보장해주는
have all those
기본적인 원칙을
factors, we can
제시를
have the
했는데
surety tourism.
이게 tourism security
And
must
as for
always
the
be real.
basic principles of tourism surety,
진짜로 이 보장해야 된단 말이에요.
we have
이게
those
잘못된 인식
factors.
같은 거를 해서 이
So
커스터머
tourism surety
컨피던스를
must always
깎아먹는
be real.
lack of customer
It
confidence
means
있죠.
that we need to
그래서는 안
have
된다.
it
그리고
no matter
tourism
what.
security then must
So
be
we
authentic.
should
그런데
not have false
authentic이라는
perceptions
단어는 우리가 아주
to
정통성이 있다.
lead to lack
맞으면
of
적통이다
customer
했을 때 우리가
confidence.
authentic인데
And tourism
여기서
surety
그냥
then must be
정당하다
authentic.
이렇게 해석을 하면
Authentic by
문맥이 맞을 것
definition
같아요.
means that legitimate
Authority
and
measures
real.
employed by the tourism industry. 자, 이런
So
authority를
he means
관광을
that
보장하는
tourism
거를 어떻게
surety should
측정을 할
be
것인가?
here.
이 관광업계에서 이런 것이
And
이제
he also talks about the surety
local
measures
government하고
employed by
정치적인
the tourism industry.
그 시기에 이게 잘
So
맞춰져야 된다.
he is talking about how to measure
그다음에 tourism
the
surety
surety
뭐
in the
폴리스도
industry.
관계도
So
있고
that measure
이런
should be
얘기를
done by the
하는데
local
그건
government
넘어가도록 하고요.
and
그다음에
in
tourism authority가 requires
line with the
innovation and
political
flexibility. 뭐
environment.
혁신과
So
flexibility.
he also talks
뭐
about the
저
tourism surety, which
유도리라고
is
유도리.
related
그
to
말은 제 생각이 안
the
나요.
safety.
그
And
flexibility를 가져야 된다.
also
그리고
he
balance must be
mentions
maintained
innovation
between
and
public and
flexibility
private
for
authority.
tourism
이건 뭐
surety.
항상 그 민관, public and private 그 섹터끼리의 서로
And a
수월이라는
balance
그
must be
욕구
maintained
사이에서
between
어떤
public and
만족이 돼야
private
된다.
surety needs.
정부에서는
So we always talk about the need
락다운이라든가
for balance
무브먼트
between the public and the
컨트롤이라든가 이렇게
private
하지만
sectors.
민간에서는 비즈니스 차원에서 이렇게 되면은 에코노믹
So the government
tourism 인더스트리하고 다른
needs
그
lockdown
산업에
and
영향을
movement
주니까
control,
예, 프라이빗
but at the same time in
정부의
the
정책과
private sector,
민간의
economic
비즈니스 사이에
factor is more
밸런스를
important.
유지해야 된다. 그런
So
얘기입니다.
the
자,
private
팬데믹
versus
레슨스.
public needs should
가서
be
이거 레슨스인데
balanced.
S가 하나 이거 들어갔네. 팬데믹 레슨스인데 이거는 이제 우리한테 뭐를 주느냐. 야,
And
이게
he moved on to
경제가 여태까지는
pandemic
그냥
lessons.
경제만 잘하면 됐지만 이런 유행병이죠. 이 코비드 19 후에 또
So
다른
what lessons we learned from pandemic?
웨이브 오브 팬데믹이 올 수
So
있단 말이에요.
now
왜? 돌연변이 하니까 이 사람도 그
the
얘기를
economy,
했어요.
we know that the economy
이
can be hit hard
그런
by the
병들이
pandemic.
illness can be mutated. 돌연변이가 일어나는.
And
그리고 새로운
there is possibility that we
내년
can have
되면
another wave of pandemic.
코비드 21 이거 나올 수 있잖아요. 그래서 이 퍼블릭
And he says that illness
컨선하고
can be
그
mutated.
에코노믹하고
And next year
밸런스를
we
어떻게
can
맞출
have,
것인가.
we may
또
have
너무 늦게
COVID,
관광을 오픈했다가
another mutation of
늦게
COVID.
리오프닝을 한다. 그러면
So
경제가 이미 다 죽은 다음에
The
리오프닝하면
concerns
다시
about
소생할 기회가 없잖아요.
the illness and
어느
economy
시점에서
should be
타이밍을
balanced. If
퍼블릭하고
we
프라이빗
open the
섹터가 딱
tourism
밸런스를 맞는
very early,
지점에서
then
오케이 문을 열어야
it
된다는데
can risk our
이런
health.
거는
Or if it is
우리가
too
저
late, then there's
그
no
트래블 버블,
use of opening
그래서
the borders.
그
So we need to
이웃나라끼리 어떤
strike the balance
쿼런틴
between the public
이라든가
and
이
private
케이스가
needs.
거의 유사한 나라끼리 지리적으로 지오그래피컬 그 디스턴스가 아주 가까운
But
나라끼리
when we talk about
서로
travel,
관광을 왕래할
bubble,
수 있도록 하는 거죠. 인터넷
so
투리즘. 그러니까 싱가포르하고 말레이시아하고
those
하는 거.
countries
그다음에 이제 가능하면
which
한중일
are
할 수 있죠.
near
트래블
and
버블 아직
have
막혔지만
a similar
그러나
level
경제가
of
도저히 이
infection,
견디기
they
어려울
can have
정도의
the
수준까지
traffic
내려간다
bubbles,
그러면
like
트래블
for example,
버블이라는
Singapore
것은
and
생겨나요.
Malaysia, or
잘못하면
Korea and
또
Japan can be
일어나요.
another example.
한중일은 안 그럴 것 같은데 그 관광의
But-
여러분 저기 그
So
나라들
if economy is
heavy
too
dependence on tourism industry.
devastated,
뭐
then
스페인,
there's
이태리,
a high probability
Caribbean
that we
country,
will have
태국,
the economic
필리핀.
bubble.
이런 나라들은 이 관광을 너무
Among, for example, heavily
눌러버리면
dependent
경제가 완전히 죽어버리는 거죠.
the countries
그런
heavily
거를
dependent
감안해서
on
리오프닝의
tourism like
타임을
Thailand, the Philippines,
정해야 된다.
and Malaysia,
근데 너무 빨리 하면은 다시 또
because tourism
chaos
is the
and
major part of their
suffering이 있다 그랬잖아요.
economy. So
오히려 혼란이
if they
있고 상당히
stop
고생이 있다.
tourism, it can
이번에
kill their
우리나라의
economy.
조치도 이렇게
But if it
해버리니까
is too
갑자기
early, it can
뭐
lead to
100명 이하에서 그냥
chaos and
500명,
suffering.
1000명으로 지금 뛰고
And
있잖아요.
at the
이게.
same time, if it is
예,
too
그래서
late,
그
there's
한번
no big
우리도
impact
한번
or effect
오프닝해서
from
이런 실수가
that
있었다.
bubbles.
그럼 넘어가기로 하겠습니다.
And
자,
overnight,
크리에이티브
for example, in Korea,
아이디어는
overnight we have a big
몇
number
가지가
of
있는데
infected
이
people.
사람은
So
이 관광하고
we have
헬스케어하고 믹스하자.
lessons learned
하지만
from our
쿼런티인을
cases
잘하고
and the
광고하고
cases in
또
our
하자.
neighboring
그런 얘기
countries.
있고. 그다음에 이 여행할 수 있는 그룹을 만들어서
And
그 사람들한테
then
여행할수록
let's talk about his
여행
creative
보조금을
ideas.
주자.
He
그런 아주 크리에이티브 아이디어라고
adopted
저는 하고
3
있습니다.
and 4
그리고 지금부터 관광에
ideas.
대해서
So
광고를
he said
시작하자.
that
제가 보기엔 여기는 언젠가
regional and
백신이 나올
local
거니까
staycations
백신이
can be
나오거나
developed
치료제가 나오기 전까지는
until
관광에
people
대해서
feel ready to
단언할 수는
travel.
없죠.
And
그렇지만
maybe the
advertise
government
now.
subsidies can be
하자.
paid to those
그다음에
travelers,
요즘에
and
좀
we
우리가
can start promotion
피해야
or
할 것이
publicity for travel.
그
Because
stay away from virtual
someday
tourism. 여러분들 그
we
가상
will have the
관광 한다는 거죠.
vaccinations
가상
and
관광 보지만 관광
treatment.
효과가 전혀 안 일어나잖아요.
We don't know when that will be, but we need to start our publicity for travel.
저는 여기 정말
And
찬성하고 있습니다.
so now we have virtual tourism, but it doesn't have any good impact on tourism industry. So virtual travel should be eliminated for the sake of the tourism industry, and we need to publicize health standards, and regional and local staycations should be developed so that the domestic tourism and staycations can continue until people feel ready to travel, so that the tourists they enjoy domestic travel. And lastly, when the pandemic ends, we cannot go back to the time before the pandemic because it's new normal era. So we need to be prepared against it. So I think that I spent a lot of time now, 3 or 4 minutes over the time that I'm given. So I summarized the presentation of Dr. Peter Tallow, and then let us move on to
As I
the
mentioned before,
discussions.
every panel has 5 minutes, between 5 and 7 minutes. And after you finish, we will go to the next panelist. And after you finish all this discussion, I'll give you more time to discuss further the issues you raised or panelists raised. So let's start. Nazarene Lim, would you go first?
Good morning, everybody. After the first cases of COVID-19 were discovered in late February 2020, the Philippine government imposed a lockdown on the country for both international and domestic travel effective March 15. While travel restrictions have eased considerably since September 2020, ours has been the most stringent lockdowns in the Asia-Pacific region. As a result, these travel restrictions and quarantine measures have affected tourism enterprises, big and small, but mostly the micro, small, and medium enterprises. These are travel agents, tour operators, tour guides, transport services, farm tourism sites, convention and exhibition organizers, and community-based enterprises, among others. They comprise the majority of businesses in the industry. The Philippine government's Economic Planning Department has estimated the gross value-added losses to the tourism industry of approximately 1.5 to 3 billion US dollars, accounting for 0.4 to 0.8% of gross domestic product. Indicators of negative economic impacts are: 1, a decline in foreign visitor arrivals from January to July of 72.8%, a decline in visitor receipts from January to July of 71.5%, and an estimated 4.8 million people employed in the tourism industry lost their jobs, went on furlough, or accepted less pay for less hours of work. The slides which I am about to show you, which summarize the Philippine tourism industry's response to COVID-19, stem from extensive public-private consultations all over the country. And this was done by Zoom or by other technological platforms. The private sector identified the following problems: 1, disruption of the supply chain; 2, need; 3, the need to divert taxpayers; the need to restructure loans; and 5, ensure the health and safety of workers and guests. I would like to acknowledge the assistance of the Philippine Department of Tourism, which provided the slides for this presentation. May we go to slide 1, please? Slide 1. The Philippine response to COVID-19 has 4 themes: protection of tourist livelihoods and tourists; number 2, sustaining business operations; 3, strengthening hard and soft infrastructure for resilience; and 4, restoring industry confidence. Next slide. Assistance to tourists and travelers. 32,000 plus foreign tourists stranded in resorts scattered in islands were sent back to their home countries in coordination with their respective embassies. This happened between July and August 2020. The hotels and local transportation were funded by the Department of Tourism. 29 special flights, termed sleeper flights, were mounted for this purpose. 11,500 domestic tourists, also stranded in various locations, were sent back to their home cities. 1,206 accommodation establishments were identified for use as quarantine facilities for Filipino workers coming home and individuals stranded abroad and in Metro Manila, hoping to go back to their home provinces. Extensive training of tourism workers and dissemination of information to the public on new health protocols, such as mandatory use of protective gear for staff and guests, body temperature checks, frequency of deep cleaning and sanitation, limited capacity in guest rooms, elevators, and transport, physical distancing, and contactless greetings and operations were disseminated widely. Slide 3, financial support for tourism enterprises. Legislation to provide, theme 3, please. Legislation to provide working capital loans at very low interest rates and loans guaranteed by the government. There was a cash for work program provided by the Department of Labor and Employment in coordination with the Department of Tourism, deferment of tax payments at the local and national levels, and credit facilities provided by government financial institutions for the upgrade, rehabilitation, or retrofitting of establishments to be compliant with food and safety standards. Theme 4, and my last slide, physical infrastructure support for destinations and businesses to adapt to the new environment. 4, COVID-19 testing centers in tourist destinations, working closely with the Department of Transportation to ensure that airports, seaports, and land transportation terminals have appropriate structures to ensure safety of travelers. And lastly, the last slide, restoring industry confidence. Next slide, please. Last slide. Restoring industry confidence. Opening up beach resorts to domestic tourism. Our very famous Boracay Island reopened to domestic tourists on October 1, and by December 15, Panglao Island in Bohol, which is another famous beach destination resort area, will reopen. The Department of Tourism is giving the private sector market and product development support for the new normal environment. Thank you, and that is the end of my presentation.
예, 감사합니다. 림 장관 말씀은
Former Secretary Lim,
이렇게 이 방역도 철저히 하고
she talked about the importance of good quarantine, and the most important probably is she mentioned reopening
they began to
Boracay
promote
Resort.
tourism 이렇게 한다 그랬어요. 그래서 아까 에코노믹하고 그다음에
So economy
헬스케어하고
and
밸런스를
healthcare,
맞추는데
keeping a balance between the two,
이 부담 때문에
but due to economic burdens, because of the
열 수밖에
economic
없는 거죠.
burdening,
더군다나
of course
아까
you will have
말씀드린
to
것처럼
open
필리핀
up
같은 경우에는
eventually,
관광의
especially for a
의존도가
country like the Philippines.
굉장히
Their
높기
dependence
때문에
on tourism in their
경제에
economy is
있어서
quite high.
이런
So
조치를 선제적으로
they
취하고 있다는
preemptively
것을
took these
알 수
measures,
있습니다.
as she explained to
Okay,
us
thank you,
in her talk.
Your Excellency Nazarene Lim. The next turn goes to Nigel Wong. Are you ready? 그 말레이시아
He is a former Secretary General of the Travel Association of
Be here
Malaysia.
today. I am Nigel. I represent the Malaysian Association of Tour and Travel Agents, which is the National Travel Agent Association in Malaysia. So just a quick introduction about myself. I have served in the association as the Secretary General since 2015. And I also run a travel agency myself, doing niche tours, both inbound and outbound, into and from Malaysia. And just a really quick some quick facts about the association. MATA has been around since 1975. We have branches in every state, and we have about 3,600 corporate members. And these members are all licensed by the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture of Malaysia. And as the National Travel Association, we cover all scopes of business, which include domestic, inbound, outbound transportation, ticketing, as well as Muslim travel, especially the Umrah and Hajj. MATA has also worked very closely with regional associations and international bodies. And these include the Federation of ASEAN Travel Associations, FATA, the ASEAN Association, the World Tourism Alliance, the WTAAA, and of course, our European counterparts in ECTAA. Now, our total membership is about 3,630 members at this point, and it is continuing to grow. Although with the current COVID situation, we're not too sure how many businesses will survive, but we are remaining positive. Now, first and foremost, I'd just like to thank Dr. Talo for his presentation, and also Mr. Kiang for his insights into the Japan travel industry. And before I just give you a brief overview of what's happening in Malaysia, I must say that what has been recommended by Dr. Talo and our colleagues in Japan, and the situations that they face are very, very similar to that in Malaysia as well. And of course, Madam Nazalina from Philippines has also highlighted many of the key issues that we are experiencing in Malaysia, particularly the impact to small and medium enterprises in the tourism business. At this point in time, a brief update from Malaysia, we have about 80,000 cases. There has been a recent spike in cases due to clusters formed by the construction and factories. in the manufacturing industry. But overall, we are quite pleased that our rate of recovery is about 83%, and that's very high. And the rate of deaths as a result of COVID-19 is only at 0.005%. And this probably sets up the presentation that I'm about to give to the audience here as to what we think may be a potential solution to weathering this COVID-19 period at this point of time. First and foremost, we are looking at basically two key areas, which is technology and the assurance to domestic and international travelers that Malaysia is a safe place to visit. So on that note, we have started a few key initiatives. We are working very closely with online platforms like Shopee, together with the Malaysian government to promote the sale of domestic tourism, hotels, as well as packages and stays to domestic tourists. Now, the recent program by the Ministry of Tourism here was to give every Malaysian a subsidy if they were to buy online through a nominated platform and through licensed agents and hotels. And at the moment, it's about 200 ringgit per person, which is about $50. Now, it may not seem like a lot, but the idea here is to generate as much movement and to keep cash flow running through the industry. And platforms like Shopee, having an established base of customers, will only serve to assist in propagating this program and getting as many people on board as possible. Now, on that note, we've also started a subsidiary company, Mata Technologies, which we currently have built and readied a platform for B2B interactions or trade. And what we hope to do is leverage this platform by advertising packages and services that our members have created to our fellow agencies and colleagues overseas who may want to buy into Malaysia. Now, why we see this as crucial is that even though we are working with public platforms like Shopee, it is also crucial to remember that most of the business that is done in the travel sphere, especially along the lines of MICE, corporate travel, or specific themed travel, is still done through agencies. And it will be the agencies that will eventually start to propagate or start to push or start to encourage the markets indirectly to travel. And given the current situation where leisure travel will probably take a long time to recover, we are focusing mostly on the initial uptake of business travel and MICE. As we all know, business has to continue, and most business travelers or travelers in going to conventions or incentives will still use a third-party service provider like agencies in order to arrange their travel itineraries and programs. Finally, we are also embarking on a special Travel Safe mark. It is a program that we have designed together with Bureau Veritas, a French audit company. And the program is very simple. It is designed to ensure that our members, our travel agencies, are trained to handle the travelers, whether they're domestic or international, make sure that they are comfortable and also prepared should there be any emergency situations. Now, the way we look at it is that COVID-19 may have caused this program to be created, but we're looking forward into the future where we expect that this level of service, this branding, will also help our agencies deliver better service regardless of what the situation may be. COVID-19 is just only one of them. Now, I'm going to keep my presentation very, very short, but as requested, these are some of the key overreaching areas that we feel is going to make a difference in travel over the next coming few years. And it will start basically and end with the reinventing of the tourism mindset. For many years, tourism stakeholders have been very siloed in their approach. We have been very individualistic when it comes to our own areas of expertise. Travel agents operate like travel agents. Airlines operate like airlines. Hotels operate within the sphere of hotels, each one trying to protect what they already have and trying to protect their margins, and also trying very hard to ensure that their competition doesn't get the better of them. And unfortunately, in many cases, this also means that we have compromised the relationships between key industry stakeholders. For example, the relationships between airlines, travel agencies, and hotels. And rather than becoming friends, and rather than collaborating, we have competed against one another. So one of the first things that we need to do is to look at greater cohesiveness within the industry. Now, recently, in our experience, and it's experienced by most of our colleagues the world over, when the COVID-19 hit and restrictions on travel were imposed worldwide, the first industry to be hit was the airline industry. And that basically created a ripple effect through the industry. And what happened was that there was a panic where consumers demanded refunds from travel agencies because airlines themselves were not proactive in coming up with handling the situation at that point in time. And even until today, we still have legal issues where consumers have unfairly targeted the middlemen or the agencies and basically taken them to court or held them accountable for services that are rendered by the airlines or the hotels. Now, what we need to do is we need to think about reinventing the way the supply chain thinks. And rather than think about being individualistic in our approach to tourism, we need to look at being cohesive, working together, identifying the weak links in the tourism ecosystem, and learning how to patch things together so that in the event a major event like this does happen again in the future, or even if they happen at micro levels, the industry as a whole will be able to weather, survive, and even assist consumers in getting their refunds or in maintaining their travel plans, right? And what we're talking about here is maintaining the resiliency of the industry by working together. Hence, convergence versus divergence, coming together as one rather than splitting our roles and working in independent silos. Now, the second thing that we see here also is the shift from regional identity versus national identity. COVID-19 has proven that as an individual destination or a country, it is very difficult for us to stand alone. Unlike big economies like China, where domestic tourism actually will help to bolster tourism businesses, countries like Malaysia with a much lower population and a population that is not accustomed to domestic travel, we find that we are at a disadvantage economically and that our tourism infrastructure is at risk. So rather than focus on just our country, in ASEAN, we have gotten together to look at focusing on regional identity, which in the future is going to help proof the tourism industry in this region against other natural disasters or political disasters or financial disasters. Now, because of this shift, we need to rethink the way that we look at the region. We need to look at the region as one, meaning the cultural, geographical, political, and natural factors need to be promoted in this region as a singular identity. Now, in short, what this means is that with the regional identity in place, industry stakeholders will also be more likely to cooperate in friendly competition. We will most likely be motivated to work together for the benefit of the whole rather than an individual destination. And what we foresee is that by combining these resources and identity as a regional destination, we are going to be able to pull tourists back in with a much larger value proposition for the tourism industry in ASEAN. Now, this necessarily does not have to apply to ASEAN only. I'm also talking about our closer neighbors like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the greater Asia or Asia Pacific regions, wherever there is a possibility to connect and to collaborate. Now, last but not least, of course, we need to leverage more on technology because of the change in spending and travel habits and the fact that the emerging markets, the millennials, are much more inclined to use technology not only to plan, but to consume travel services. And so it is very incumbent upon industry players to be able to identify the new trends and to pivot their businesses from brick and mortar businesses to look more closely at integrating technology, whether it's promotional, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's operational, into their current business models so that they will be able to compete and respond, which is the keyword, to market shifts, which are very drastic, very sudden in today's world, even pre-COVID-19. Now, in summing up, these three items here are not just relevant only to the travel and tourism sector. They are relevant to many other service sectors of which Asia is very, very famous for. And so, in short, I think even in the sports, in the cultural and the event side, and in tourism, and even some of the other service and hospitality sectors, we should be looking at these three key points in reinventing the tourism mindset for the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong pointed out very important things. But it's a very surprise to me because they are promoting MICE business even under the COVID-19. This is really surprising news. And also he addressed two key points like resilience, like how they get back to normal, get back to what used to be. So travel industry, each section of travel industry, they should cooperate to get resilience. The other one is Asia's identity. He said Asia is one culture, single identity. And within the single identity, each country, they should cooperate and compete. What he called competition. I think he didn't mention that word, but I understand that way. Yeah. Thank you, Nigel. 자, 다음은 부산관광공사의 정희준 사장님이 토론해 주시겠습니다.
예, 안녕하세요.
Next.
예, 반갑습니다. 정희준입니다.
The floor will go
사실
to
이제 저는 토론자로 나왔기
Mr.
때문에
Jung Hee-jun from the Busan Tourism Corporation.
발제자들께서
Thank
발표하신
you.
내용을 좀 이어받아서
Good morning,
해야
everyone. I'm
되는데
Hee-jun Jung,
저는 뭐 또
I'm
이제
the panelist.
공기업에 있기도 하고
and as
이
the
스피커를 끌
presenters
수 없나요?
told us, I will share their insights,
그,
and I'm
예,
working
일단
for
진행하겠습니다.
Busan Tourism
그래서
Corporation,
그 앞서
and
말씀하신 분들 내용 몇
that
가지와
is the
함께
public
저희 이제
corporation
지방의 지역의
invested by
RTO들이
the
지금 처한
government.
상황과
And
앞으로의 그
as
과제들을 좀 말씀을 드릴까
you told
합니다.
us
뭐한 7, 8분쯤
how
얘기하면 되나요? 예.
we are doing as an
일단 저에게
RTO,
주어진
and I will talk
역할이라고
about
하면은
the
이제
challenges that we will
진화가
we have
되겠습니다.
to
새로운 상황에
resolve.
적응을 해야 되는데요.
So
사실 이제
I'm
과거에 오랜
given a
기간
couple
동안
of
그
responsibilities.
관광의 개념이 좀 바뀌었죠.
They
트렌드가.
are
그래서 옛날에는
adaptation
경치 관광
and
위주였었는데
advancement.
이게
By
지금은 이제
adaptation, I mean that I
도시관광으로
have
상당히
to
와
be
있었습니다.
adapted to new
21세기
environment. And for the
들어서요.
past
근데
years,
지금 다시
we
이제
have seen the
비대면이라든가
changes in the tourism.
자연관광이
And in the
강조가
past,
되다 보니까
people like
다시
to
경치관광으로
see
가는 그런
the
측면이
scenery, but
좀
now
있습니다.
they like
그
have to have
한국관광공사와
travels around the
마찬가지로
cities.
저희
And now, because of the
부산관광공사도
COVID-19,
새로운
people
관광지
like
개발에
to
나섰거든요. 그래서 지난
go back
얼마
to
전에도
the past,
뭐
normal.
부산
I mean,
오시면 여러분들이
they like
갈
to
수
see the
있는
scenery rather
그
than
비대면 관광지 뭐 칠선,
the
뭐
cities.
가을
So
관광
our
칠선,
corporation
뭐 이런
started to
식으로
develop
해서
new
소개를
products,
했는데
and
사실
we
이게 좀
listed up
재밌는
50
겁니다.
destinations that we
새로운
can
관광지를 이제
safely
개발을 하는 건데
travel
그 왜-
in
그
the fall.
관광지들이 왜 선정이 됐나?
And what interesting about is
관광객들이나
that
시민들이 잘 안 가던 곳이에요.
rather
사실은
than
관광지로서는 인기가 없던 데인데를 우리가 새롭게
developing
발굴해서 여러분 여기
new
가세요 하고 이제
destinations,
centrum으로
we
내놓는
started to
거거든요.
look back at
뭐랄까요, 좀
the
모순 같기도
destinations
하고. 근데
that
지금
have
상황이
been
그렇게 됐습니다.
unpopular in the past
그 어느 분은
because of
우리가
their remoteness. But
2020년을
nowadays, because of the
시작을
COVID-19,
했는데
remoteness
갑자기
is the
2025년을 살게
the
된 꼴이라고
attention is getting the
말씀하셨는데
attention among
저도
people.
그 표현이
And
굉장히
in
적당하다고
starting
생각을 합니다.
2020,
그러니까 중간에 이런 중간 과정이 없이
we
갑자기 한 5년, 10년 정도를
feel
우리가
like we
건너뛰어서
jumped to
지금 살고 있는
2025.
그러한 상황이
I mean,
된 거거든요. 그래서
that we never
결국
thought
지금
about
우리는
having
이
this
시점에서도 계속 끊임없이
online
강제로 적응을
environment
당해야
or
하는
new normal,
그러한
which
순간에
we
와
expected to
있다고
have by
생각을 합니다.
2025.
저희 부산관광공사
So,
입장에서도 굉장히
by now,
이제
we are
큰일이
forced
난 게
to adapt ourselves
저희가
to
시티투어
new
버스도
normal
운영을 하고 있고요.
that's here to only
태종대라든지
to us.
용두산공원 같은 데서도 저희가
So
사업장을 가지고
we have a
있지만
big challenges.
또 아르피나라는
We
라는 또
run
유스 호스텔도 가지고
As a
있는데
corporation, we run
지금
city
적자가
tour
너무
buses,
커졌습니다. 그러니까
and we
작년에
have many branches in
오랜만에
Busan.
한 3억 적자였는데요.
And we
지금
also run
부산관광공사가
used
연말이
hostel,
되면 올해 적자가
And we are in
이제
the
40억
deep
원을 넘어가는 그러한 상황이 돼버렸어요. 그래서
And
저희도 지금
now we
유급
have
휴직까지도 고려를 하는
more
이러한
than
상황이
$3,000
됐습니다.
now.
그래서
But by the end
이러한
of the
새로운
year, we
상황에
will
굉장히
have
어려운 상황에
more
위기
than
상황에
$4
우리가
million
적응하고
in
진화를 해야 되는
rent.
그러한
So people are
처지에 놓여 있는 거죠. 그 마이스를
laid
예로
off
들면요.
by the
그 이제 대면
corporations.
회의에서 비대면 회의로 전환이 되지
And
않았습니까? 지금 저희도 이러한 그 비대면 회의를 화상 회의를
For
하고 있는
example,
건데요.
MICE,
공사 내에서도
So
12월
we
들어서
are
많은
shifting
그 올해
from
그 사업 보고
in-person
성과
meetings
내지는
to
결과
online
보고를 하고
meetings.
있는데 다 비대면 회의로 화상 회의를
So
하고 있습니다.
MICE, my
근데 원래
corporation,
이제 그 마이스
we are
업계가
having
어려운 것 중에
meetings
하나가 이제
online
사람이라는 게
to
만나서
report
얘기를
our
해야
annual
되는데 식사도
results
하면서
and
지금
daily
그게 불가능해졌다는
meetings.
거 아닙니까?
And
근데 이제
one of the
앞으로는 그게
difficulties
기준이
of
될 것
MICE
같습니다.
is that
지금
we need
우리가
to
하고
get
있는
together
이러한 비대면
and
화상
mingle
회의가
together to have
기준이
better
되고요.
ideas for our
그다음에
industry,
만나서
but
하는
it's
회의가 이제 앞으로
forbidden.
불편해질 거라고
So I
저는
think
생각을
that
합니다. 이런
online
것들을
and
우리가
virtual
지금
meetings
빨리
will be
받아들이고
new normal going forward.
그에 따르는 변화를
And
해야겠죠.
on
그래서
in-person
미팅
meetings will
테크놀로지의 발전이
not
굉장히
be as
중요해졌어요.
popular as before.
지금
So we are
이
forced
회의를
to
하는 중간에도
adapt
가끔
ourselves
좀
to
이제
new
불편한
normals. And
기술적인
with the new
문제들이
technology,
발생을
we
하고
can
있는데요.
make it happen, I
제가
guess.
12월 들어서 많은 그
So during
회의나
this
그 보고
conference,
회의를
we all
화상 비대면
sometimes
회의로 하게
have
되면서
technical
느낀 게
problems, and I
굉장히
think
많이
that
좋아졌구나 하는 걸
virtual
느끼게
meetings and
됐습니다.
online
그리고 또 하나
meetings
느낀
can
거는
happen
화면보다는
seamlessly
오디오가 더 중요하다는 것도
only
느끼게 됐습니다.
when we
그리고
have
오디오에서도요,
technical
과거와 같은
support.
그러한 딜레이
But now I
현상이
see many
굉장히 많이
technical
줄어들었어요.
advances,
그래서
and the audio environment
조금만
is very
노력을
important.
기울이고 조금만 투자를 하면
And
거의
rather
이제
than having
실시간
delays in
오디오도
delay, we
가능해지는
have
그러한 상황이
excellent
됐습니다.
audio
그렇게
environment
되면
and technology
이러한
now.
비대면
So
화상 회의 이러한 모임이
only
오히려 기준이
with
되고
small environment
만나서
we
하는
can have
회의가
real-time
회의나
audio
모임의
and
이벤트들이 오히려
video support
불편해지는 그러한
so that we can have
순간이
video
곧 오지 않을까
conferences
그렇게 생각을 합니다.
rather than
그래서
in-person meetings.
지금
The
이제
in-person meetings
그
will
오늘
not
발표해 주신 분들 내용들을 보면
we will not
그중에 우리가
feel
지금
comfortable
참고를 해서 빨리빨리
with
계획을
in-person
세워서
meetings.
미래를 준비해야 되는 것도 있긴
I
있는데
guess.
또 한편으로는 좀
And
이런 생각도 해요. 이게
If you look at the
제가 이제
topics
적응을
of the
당하고
presentations
있다라고
today,
표현을 했는데요.
they
이러한
emphasize
사전에
that we need
준비하는
to
게
get
얼마나
prepared
의미가 있을까 하는
for the
생각도
future.
조금 하게 됐습니다. 그래서
And I said that we
일단
are
저희가
forced
준비를 하는 것도
to
중요하지만
adapt
우리가 뭔가 느꼈을
ourselves
때
to
그때 빨리
the future.
대응을
But
하고
I think
전환하는
maybe
이러한 노력이
what is
좀
the use
중요하지
of
않을까 싶습니다.
preparing
자,
well in
그렇다면
advance? Because
부산관광공사와 같은 지역의 이
rather
공기업이
than
무엇을 할
be well
것인가에 대한
preparatory, what's
논의로 이제
important
마무리를
more
해야 될 것
is
같은데요.
to
역시 그
be
지역
very
그
adaptive
관광
and responsive quickly to what's
마이스업계와의
happening now.
어떤 협업,
And
공동 작업
before
이러한
I wrap
것들이
up,
더욱
I will talk
중요해지고요.
about what
특히 그러한
our
기업들의
corporation is doing.
적응과
We are
진화를
doing
우리가 이제 앞으로 도와야
collaboration
되지
with
않을까
MICE
생각을 합니다.
industry,
그리고
and that is
특히
very important.
지역에서는
And
이런 공기업의
we
역할이
need to
굉장히
help
중요하거든요.
the MICE
이제
industry
마이스
to
업계를
be
예를
more
들면
adaptive and
부산이
resilient
우리나라의 제2의 도시인데요.
in regions,
제1의 도시라고 하는
the
서울과 한번 비교를
roles and
해보면
responsibilities of
굉장히 많이 다르죠.
public
서울에
corporations
가면
are very important. Busan
서울시라는
is the biggest
지자체가 있고요.
city in
동시에
the second
수많은
biggest city in
중앙
Korea,
부처들,
and the first biggest one
중앙정부가
is
있습니다.
Seoul City.
엄청나게
And we
많은
have Seoul
공기업들이
City,
있죠. 또 이제 중앙
which
부처들이 있고요.
is
그다음에 또
the
대기업이 있어요. 그래서
부처,
사실 서울은요.
which is the local government, and in Seoul we have
그다음에
many
대기업,
government
이렇게 세 개의 축이 함께
agencies
돌아가면서
and
관광산업,
big
마이스 산업들이
companies
유지가 되는데
headquarters.
부산은
So in Seoul,
아시는 분들은
we have the
아시겠지만
central government,
부산시밖에 없습니다.
local government,
그래서 이
and
마이스,
big
특히
corporations,
마이스 업계는요,
and they
부산시에
are
대한
propping
의존도가
up
엄청나게
MICE industry.
높습니다. 다른
But in
서울과
Busan,
비교를
we
해보면
only have
그래서
Busan City,
이런 그
the
큰
local
기업들도
government.
좀 도와줘야 되고
So
중앙 부처도
MICE
도와줘야
industry
되는데
is
이게 지금
heavily
빠져버리니까 부산시에만 의존을
dependent
하는
on
그러한 업계의
the local
현실이거든요.
government.
마이스
So
업계가
we have
이러한데
big roles
관광은 더
helping
말할 나위가 없죠.
the MICE
마이스
industry.
업계는 좀 의견들을
So
종합을
that is the
해보면
reality that we have to
2019년 대비해서
admit.
한 절반
So
정도의
things
매출을
are
올렸다고
worse
해요.
for
굉장히 어려운
tourism
거죠.
industry.
근데 관광
What
쪽은
MICE industry says
그에 미치질 못하죠.
is
한
that
20%
their
잘하는 데가 한
revenue
20%
in
정도라고 보시면 될
2020
겁니다.
is half of the
그래서
revenue they
이
had
관광
in
마이스
2017.
업계가
But
다
things are
어려운데
worse for
이러한
the
상황에서
tourism
우리가
industry.
무엇을 할
It's
것인가?
gonna be
그 지역
only
업계와의
20%
협업이
of the revenue
중요하고요.
they had in
그러한
2017.
가운데에서도 또 우리가
So,
공기업이긴 하지만 또
as
새로운
a
상품들을 계속
government
개발을
agency
하고
or
새로운
as
프로그램들을 운영을
a
하면서
public corporation, we need
업계와의
to
공존,
continue to
상생을
develop new
모색하는
programs
것이
and new
지금
products so that
내년
we can
저희 부산
coexist
관광공사에게
with
주어진
the
가장 큰
tourism
숙제,
industry.
과제 아닌가
That is
그렇게
the goal
생각을 합니다.
of our
이것으로 제
corporation
토론을
for
마치도록
next
하겠습니다.
year. That is the biggest
감사합니다.
challenge
네.
that we face now. That wraps up
정의준
my
사장님께서는
presentation. Thank you.
이제 새로운 관광지를
Mr.
개발했다.
Chong
그래서 사람들이 안 가던
told us
곳을
that
이
we
홍보하게 되는
will
이런 참 아이러니도 있는 것 같아요.
promote new
왜냐면은
destinations
사람들이
that used to be unpopular among tourists
저는 플레이스를
because
선호하기
they
때문에
are remote
그런
areas.
트렌드에
So
맞게
tourists
부산시 관광공사에서
nowadays
대처하고
prefer
있는 것
remote
같습니다.
areas
그리고
to be
비대면 사실
safe.
그렇죠. 화상회의도
And he
이게
also talked
이제
about
이뉴 노멀로 돼서 이게 스탠다드가 된다 그러면
the video conferences and
앞으로
meetings.
마이스나 이런
They
것도
become new normal now. So the
비대면으로
MICE industry
간다.
also should
그러면 아까
start
이
to focus on
탈러
virtual. And
교수도 그
now
지금
we
줌에
have
들어왔어요.
Professor Talo here with us.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Talo. Now,
I apologize for being late. Somehow, this is an example of how the new normal is not always going to work. And I was under the impression that I was to speak with you tomorrow night and not tonight. And so it's only by accident that I'm here. And I, again, apologize. I did write a major paper. Can you all hear me? I hope. I did write a major paper for all of you, and I believe that that will be distributed to everyone. Right now, rather than take too much of your time, I'm going to see if I can do share screen here. And the Skype unknown, Finder unknown, desktop. Let's see if it goes here. It may work, may not work. Open system. It may work or may not work to share screen, but I will go over some of the key elements and speak very slowly. I do not believe that we should work towards a new normal. I think that we're seeing very quickly the development of vaccines. I believe that many of us want to get back as quickly as possible to normal tourism. And we're seeing this around the world that people are looking to try to find new ways to travel. Yes, the travel industry has been hurt, but it's basically on long haul travel. Right now, we're fighting 3 wars: a medical war, an economic war, and a perception war. And we in the tourism industry cannot afford to lose the fear and the perception war. That means that if we continuously go to some form of non-personal relationships, people will come to believe that they will never, ever come back to the classical form of tourism. And I think it's very essential that we point out to people vaccines are coming, that we need to help the local tourism industry survive a pause rather than a destructive area, and that we work to mitigate fear and to create a way that people are going to be able to create new areas. Now, we have many challenges. Tourism is not going to be an international event for a while, basically because people are not afraid of flying, they are afraid of airline terminals. And through much of the world, airline terminals have not done a good job at assuring health. One of the things we need to do is understand the interconnection between airline terminals, travel, and tourism. And if we're able to create safe means of travel, then I believe people will want to come back. That means that we have to show people that they don't have to be afraid. Questions we need to ask: are we going to care for a visitor if that visitor does get sick? Can I go to a place and not be in quarantine? It doesn't matter if I'm going to a city or to a countryside. If I cannot get into Korea without 2 weeks of quarantine, then I'm not going to go. That means that there are three forms of tourism. There's local tourism, regional tourism, and international. And those are going to develop first local, then regional, and then international. We have to figure out who's going to cover the cost of a quarantine in the short term. And how long will we quarantine foreign visitors? And what happens if the foreign visitor is not allowed to return home? Now that means we have both risks and crises. Right now, we're putting more emphasis on the crisis than we are on the risk. And yet, really, we need to be thinking more about the risks. What are some of the problems that we are facing in risks? What happens if people get so used to being online or during virtual tourism that when tourism returns, they don't want to do it? They're going to say, I've already been to that place and there's no need for me to go back. And so I would encourage us to develop a short-term plan, a medium-sized plan, and a long-term plan. Now, in order to do that, we have to create the economic wherewithal to be able to do it. And that means we have to understand some of the basic principles of tourism surety. And let me define tourism surety for you. The first part of tourism surety is understanding that which is safe, making sure the visitor is safe. Secondly, in an area, thank God in Korea you don't have this, issues of security. And thirdly, we need to think about health. We need to think about the environment. We need to think about culture. We need to think about protecting not only the visitor, but also the local population. So that makes life much more complicated than we might have begun. We need to train and better train our tourism surety providers, such as our police departments, people in the front lines of hotels, so that they don't panic, but they know exactly what to do. And that means we're going to have to create innovation and flexibility. If we are so enamored with a paradigm that we cannot change it as the situation changes, then in the end, we're going to have terrible problems. We must maintain a balance between private and public security. Now that balance is essential, and that means we have to understand not only the needs of the visitor, but also the economic pain that people are beginning to feel. And that's something where governments can help. We need to, for example, pay people perhaps not to work at this stage. If we're going to close a restaurant and we don't pay the restaurant in order to maintain its employees or maintain its expenses, that restaurant is going to go out of business. And then when we need the restaurant, it won't be there. In the United States, we expect to lose half of the restaurants in this country. In a city such as New York, which is a major restaurant city, they may lose up to 60% of all their restaurants. Again, that's 60%. That the economic destruction to the city of New York by losing that many restaurants is unheard of. In the same way, the cultural centers, which are developed, which are closed right now, will not be around if we're going to do it. Museums are selling off many of their precious items because they cannot afford to pay for the electricity or the basic upkeeps of their buildings. And the winter is coming. So we need to come up with some very creative and economic ways. Now, on the whole, I tend to be a real capitalist, but there are times when you do have to spend money in order to survive. And that means, and I was asked to come up with some ideas. The first one is we must begin to figure out a way to not allow people to go bankrupt. If that means that we have to pay people to stay home or to be closed, then that's something we're going to have to do. Secondly, we're going to have to consider paying people to travel. Now, up till now, the tourism industry has assumed that the visitor will pay, and that's where the money will come from. But if people do not travel at all, and there's no creativity as far as money circulating, then we're going to have long-term problems because they will get used to not traveling. And one of the fears that I have is that in this virtual world, this world that we're talking about as this virtual world about where people can come up with, oh great, it finally came through. This virtual world where people are incapable of going to new places, we're going to lose the tourism industry. Thirdly, we need to mix tourism with healthcare. That means that when people travel, they have to know where the travel is, how quickly they can get to it, and what ideas that they're going to want to be there. We're going to have to assure the public that the locale will take care of the people, the visitor, should that person get sick. Were I to go to Korea, I would have many fears. One, could I pay for the health insurance? Will my health insurance cover me? What happens if I don't understand the language? What happens if I'm given medicine and then when I finally return home, my doctor doesn't understand the medicine? In other words, we're going to have to create international forms of medicine. Next, we need to advertise. This is the time to put tourism back on people's front burners. This is the time to make people think about tourism. And that means we need to advertise, advertise, and advertise. Again, I am not for virtual tourism. Instead, I think we need to provide basic caring information before the person arrives, but we are going to need to get people to arrive. Now, I don't believe the crisis will last for many more years. I think that by the summer of 2021, a good part of the world's population will already be vaccinated. In the United States, vaccinations are starting on Monday, in just 2 days. In England, vaccinations are already taking place. In much of Europe, there will be vaccinations taking place. And that means that once we create herd immunity, the fear of travel to a great extent will go away. So I would encourage you, plan now, but encourage people to come. And that means that the tourism industry has to work with governments. It has to create a way so that people do not go bankrupt. We have to support the local tourism industry economically so that when we want it to come back, they will be there for us. We need to interview people who have traveled to a location and are not afraid to travel. We need to publicize our health standards. And when the pandemic does end, and it will end, then we have to not be afraid to go back to the time before the pandemic. Now, I think if we begin to do many of these types of concepts, then much of the fear that people have will go away. My biggest fear is that we are come to believe that the world cannot change again. The world was functioning and tourism was doing brilliantly just 11 months ago. It's only 11 months that we have been in this pandemic. If you look at the history of the world, we have had multiple pandemics. Certainly, this is much less severe than, for example, the Spanish flu of 1918, which killed 50 million people. It is much less severe than the Black Plague in medieval Europe that killed half the population. Yes, we have had 3, 4, 5 million people die, but in pandemic terms, that is a very small number in comparison to what it could have been. I think we need to work with modern science and come to understand that if we work with science and the tourism industry is not isolated just among itself, but rather works with people around the world, then we can create a tourism industry that's going to be resilient. It's going to be able to show a new bounce to itself. And I think we can bring tourism back in 2022 much stronger than it was even in 2021. I want to thank you. And again, I apologize for the time differential and the fact that that's one of the problems with virtual tourism. If were I in Korea, I would not have been late. So again, I apologize. I've written a full paper for you, and I know that paper will be distributed so that you can all read it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Carlo. It's not easy for you to be ready for this online forum over there. 자, 그다음에
Now let me invite Mr. Seung-pil Baek, who is the Vice President of Korea Association of Travel Agents. He will make a presentation. Mr. Baek, please.
네, 안녕하세요.
Yeah.
Hello,
여행업협회
I am Seung-pil Baek from KATA, the Korea Association of Travel Agents. I'm the Vice President. I heard a lot of great comments by the participants, and under the current COVID-19 situation, this is still spreading out in the world. I am quite regretful that this is happening. So at KATA, our association, we have gathered some information about the current situation in Korea. So we have about 17,000 members registered. Of them, 70 to 80% of them have either shrunk their business or closed up their business. And even if they stay open, they are close to closing up their business. So that shows not just around the world, but also here in Korea, the travel industry has been quite seriously damaged. So we have asked the government to support us, and as a result, special employment retention has been designated. So that has been beneficial for us, of course, but the government support, due to their financial resources limitations, it's not always possible, and they seem to experience some difficulty to offer further support. So since the outbreak of COVID-19, our sales dropped almost by 98%. So in this situation, if the COVID-19 situation continues, the industry itself, the tourism and travel industry itself, whether it will continue to exist or not, we have some big question mark there. So currently, the COVID-19 is still ongoing, and the travel industry, we have to come up with some recovery plan. What are the strategies for us? So we also continue to submit some requests, special requests to the government as well, as was mentioned before. At the moment, 14-day self-quarantine requirement. Well, this is to limit cross-border movements, and that in reality means suspension of business for us. Not just in Korea, but in other countries around the world, the economic activities are seriously dampened, of course. So about this, not just Korea, but other countries as well. So tourism and travel industries and other relevant institutions, we have to put our heads together and cooperate, because unconditional 14-day self-quarantine, unconditionally imposed to everybody, we have to try to ease that out step by step, so that we secure free movement of people while observing strictly with the quarantine requirements to secure the minimum economic activities. So there's no movement ban within each country, but if you want to cross border over to another country, there's a mandatory 14-day self-quarantine. So whether that's the most rational measure, whether it has enough grounds when they came up with this 14-day number, but Korean Center for Disease Prevention, so they're doing some investigations. So 14-day self-quarantine needs to be eased at this point, I think. So, well, as government support, we have received government support, yes, but there are limitations. And many countries around the world are trying to secure money to support the industry, but due to their financial limitations, at least, we want to see our travel companies survive in their business. Unless this is done, we cannot resolve these problems, and especially the industry continues to talk about the necessity to ease the self-quarantine, not just in Korea, but the Southeast Asian countries where tourism is quite key, especially in Europe too. So easing the self-quarantine requirement, I think there is more and more people calling for that. Same in Korea. So I hope the authorities will take a good look into this possibility. And on the other hand, if we can improve the business environment, well, travel bubble, Hong Kong, Singapore has that. And in this regard, between the countries where they are doing a great job with their quarantine, so travel bubble can be a good way to allow some travel and tourism. So within travel bubble, we can strictly observe the government's quarantine requirements. Then the industry can have the foundation to survive. That's my view. That's all.
네, 고맙습니다. 이번
Thank you.
COVID-19으로
Because of the COVID-19, the industries hit hard, and the government subsidy or support should be granted to the industry.
Make them survive.
As we told you, it's about resilience. So resilience is about recovery.
이 회복 불능 상태로 가기 전에 서포트를 해달라 그 얘기입니다. 자, we have 18 minutes to go until 1 o'clock. So many of you are still on Zoom. I appreciate it, your patience. And if you have any questions or comment to add further, please to do it. Maybe 1 or 2 minutes per person, if you like. Who'll go first? Your Excellency Netherlands, do you have any issues to address?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Thank you to all the panelists. I learned from each of your presentations. We are all in the same boat, having problems with reopening our economies. The travel bubble, I think, is a very good idea. The first one who broached it was New Zealand and Australia. But recently, I was in also a panel presentation with the ambassador of New Zealand, and he says that it is not yet being implemented because there are still a lot of problems connected with different protocols between New Zealand and Australia. So I don't know whether the one between Hong Kong and Singapore is working, but there are a lot of challenges in implementing tourism bubbles. Maybe Nigel, you can tell us whether Malaysia and Singapore have a travel bubble?
Sure. We had a quick meeting with Singapore recently, and of course, the news is they have postponed their travel bubble to next year because of the spike in cases in Hong Kong as well as in Singapore. Look, on Malaysia's side, we have been pushing very hard to have a managed reopening of borders, so travel bubbles in a way. We've realized that to just say open up the borders is not going to be feasible because, as Dr. Talo has already mentioned, people are still very hesitant of traveling. They're still a little bit afraid. Even domestically, we have people who are opting not to travel simply because of the rise in numbers, although it's controlled here. So all I can say is that we are still pushing for some sort of arrangement between Singapore and Malaysia, and hopefully Thailand and Malaysia, starting specifically with essential business travel. And hopefully once the vaccine starts to be distributed here in our countries, a gradual reopening of leisure tourism in managed stages. I think the other problem that we are a little bit concerned about, of course, is that airlines especially have been impacted. So even with the travel bubble open, traveling between countries, especially via air, may still be a fairly expensive exercise. And that will probably, besides the fear of travel, COVID-19, the cost is going to be probably one other prohibiting factor, even though the travel bubbles are up. That's just my opinion. Thanks.
Yes, and if I could add, it will not only be a problem of airline costs, but hotel costs are also becoming more expensive because many places, in order to use a hotel, they require 48 hours between each guest so that the room has had a chance to be disinfected. And that means that hotels, even if they're full, are only running at 50% occupancy. 50% occupancy is below the minimum level of 60%, which is needed for a hotel to survive. So we have to not only think of the travel bubble as far as airlines, but also as airports, taxis, transportation to and from an airport, buses, hotels, and restaurants. And all of those each have their own particular problem that has to be thought through. That's why I'm strongly pushing for the fact that one, we have vaccination as quickly as possible to create herd immunity, and two, that governments find the money one way or the other to support people through this hump with the hope that by the summer of 2021, we'll be able to begin to truly reopen. Sorry for adding to your conversation.
But as Nigel pointed out, the important thing is, as I think, it's a need of people who want to travel because of so much fear and uncertainty level of safety. People are really reluctant to travel overseas countries. I think Nigel, he mentioned earlier, we need some mindset. So until we have a mindset, really like to make a travel, those concerns, the issues will not be finished. So I think the need, so first, need goes before safety and quarantine. Even though under this situation, people they like to travel, but the level of need it became very low. So until we have any kind of resilience of this kind of mindset, um, we cannot easily recover the travel industry's business. Your Excellency Nazarene, do you have any additional comment?
Yes.
If you have,
Well,
yeah.
several of the panelists have brought up the need for retraining, upskilling of tourism frontliners and workers to the new normal. So the Department of Tourism of the Philippines has been spending a lot of its time and effort in doing that while preparing for recovery. I think that people in the front line serving guests have to be very confident, as Professor Talo has mentioned, very confident in dealing with guests in contactless greeting, contactless information operations, which means also an investment by hotels and restaurants in infrastructure that is compliant with the new health protocols. So I think that if there's a lot of information, retraining, upskilling of workers and information dissemination to the public about what will keep them safe and secure while traveling, this will be a big help as we slowly return to recovery.
여러분들 지금까지 거의 2시간을 꼬박 앉아
So,
계시고
thank you for your
그
attendance
경청해
and your
주셔서
patience
고맙습니다.
during the morning session. And thank you
그리고
all of
이
you who
해외에서
logged in from overseas.
발표와 토론에 참여하신 여러분들한테도 감사드립니다.
Despite different time zones,
자, 이것으로
so I announced that
인터내셔널
we
세션을
wrap up
마치도록
the morning
하겠습니다.
session for
여러분
the Global
수고하셨습니다.
Conference on Safety
고맙습니다.
Tourism. Thank you for your attention and your attendance. Thank you very much.